Okay guys, we're going to start cutting up the whitetail. I'll kind of show you how I do it. I'm sure there's different ways to do it, but this is how I was shown. I always start with the shoulders. The shoulder bone here, scapula goes up. So we're essentially just going to separate this from the carcass. And you can lift and pull. A good sharp knife is your friend. And you're just separating muscles at this point. So I'm going to get the other one off just like that, and I'll show you how to cut them up in a second. Okay, shoulders off the deer on the table. With wild game, I do not like any fat, any bloodshot in what I'm going to consume. Wild game typically has a strong flavor in the fat. So I try and get as much of the fat off as you can. You're going to need some sharp knives, a wastebasket, and a place to put your clean meat. Because ours has hung for a few days, there's a dry outer layer that I always try and take off. I don't like it in my meat. Some people are different. It's kind of up to you how far you trim it. At this point, you get all of the hair off, or at least as much as you can from skinning. I start with one side and I just work my way through that side, getting what's accessible now off. And then it's kind of a back and forth game. This side, that side, this side, that side, until we're ready to remove the meat from the bones. Always cut away from yourself. Good sharp knife. Know where your fingers are. Don't push too hard.
How long have you been doing this?
Oh my goodness. 20 years. I cut commercially for almost 10 years. Quite a while. And you learn all sorts of tricks and trades as you go. Tips and tricks, whatever. There's more than one way to skin a cat, guys. I'm sure a lot of people don't do it this way, and I'm sure I'll be ridiculed in the comments for doing something, but that's how I was trained to do it, and that's how I like to do it. So.
Is there a big difference between cutting up wild game and like a cow or something?
Yes. Domestic game, because it's typically grain fed, or we can control what domestic game eats, the fat is not near as potent, and that might have a lot to do with hormones as well. So typically in hogs and beef, we utilize a fair amount of the fat. It won't get trimmed near as hard, but at the end of the day, the muscle groups are basically the same. A shank's a shank, a shoulder's a shoulder, a loin's a loin. They do have different names commercially versus wild game. Wild game, the way I was raised, we never leave bones in it. And a lot of that is when I first started cutting meat, chronic wasting disease was becoming the thing. It wasn't until later in my career that chronic wasting disease went back to only the spinal cord and the brainstem. So historically, we've always deboned everything. So what I'm doing now is I'm taking the foreshank up and around to the shoulder blade off. you're cutting against the bone with your knife, but not cutting into the bone with your knife. Oh, I just threw that in the trash. Don't throw it in the trash. That was a good piece of meat. I got distracted talking. So you use the bone as a guide, but you are trying not to cut on the bone. That will make your knife not last, the sharpness of your knife not last near as long. Anything that looks like it would be hard to chew, take it out now. Any little bits of fat you can get off, take it off now. Okay, for the shoulder, there's a joint here. You can kind of see how it pivots. Once again, you're just following the bone, not cutting into it, just beside it. Here's the shoulder joint where it connects to the scapula. You do not have to take the bone apart, but it can make it easier to handle if you do. I like to break it down in as small a chunks as possible, just so it's more manageable and it doesn't get as overwhelming.
Are those bones safe for animals?
It's debatable. Deer can carry worms. If your dogs are up on their worms, fine, but we don't give them to our dogs out of deer. They're a soft bone. If you have big dogs, they could choke, splinter the bone and choke on the splinters. I don't know, kind of your preference, I suppose.
What about like raw game meat? I know a lot of people like the raw diets for their animals, but because of those diseases, is it okay?
It's controversial. No, I don't feel like I'm educated enough to say whether it's good or bad. So here we're lifting the blade muscle off of the scapula in a domestic situation on beef. This is I'm drawing a blank. Yeah, I'll think of it in a minute. The scapula it's consisted of basically two solid pieces that are connected. There's a flat plate shape with a T on it, and you're gonna just bring your knife down and around, and then come in from the bottom side and lift. Flat iron steak, there we go. And a lot of how you cut up animals is how you cook. I don't do a lot of roasts. We use steaks and burger. That's just our eating style, our cooking style. So that's kind of what I'm going for here. There's a pretty aggressive tendon on the back side of that. Good thick stuff like that's just going to be chewy. A lot of people argue that it can be ground. It's just how I was taught to do it, is not to grind it, take 2 seconds and cut it off. I do leave some silver skin on the meat, as long as it's a thin silver skin. There's a point where it comes to time management versus benefit of meat harvested, I guess. And you kind of have to use your own determination on that. Once again, with this piece here, there's a pretty thick strip of sinew going down the center of it. I just take it out. The rest goes to burger. This is the shoulder muscle. It can make a very nice roast if you guys like to cook roasts. Clean up the bloodshot and the fat off of it, and that's pretty palatable. As far as a lot of the, in roasts, a lot of the connective tissue will cook down. So I would say that that's pretty fit for a crock pot or slow cooker roast there. Might pull off a little bit more of that guy, but that would be a pretty sufficient roast. We just don't eat a lot of roasts. So for me, it's great burger. And once again, in the shoulder muscle, there's a really thick connecting tissue here that does, I don't know if it would grind well or not, but I was taught to take it out, so I always take it out.
If this were to have any kind of disease or worms, where would you find it? How would you know?
You would be able to see worms in the flesh. Diseases, I look for any inconsistencies in the meat, I guess. How the deer was acting before you harvested it. If you're worried about chronic wasting disease, most states have test sites that you can take the head to. They'll take a sample and then let you know within a certain amount of time whether it's a chronic waste animal or not. Some states require you to, here they do not.
We had a friend tell us this morning that her brother's elk had some green coloring or something around the joints and weren't really sure what kind of disease and stuff that was. So, you know, just...
He took it to the FWP. The FWP took the animal, or took the carcass, I guess, and issued him a new tag. So apparently it's something pretty extensive if the FWP is going to take the animal for studies. If it has worms or something, they pretty much tell you you're on your own. So I'd be curious to know what that animal actually had. Okay, next I pull the back straps off, where the hind legs come down, and you can kind of see the definition of the hip bone, where the hind leg kind of ends and the rib section begins. I separate the flank, not going in far enough to hurt the tenderloins. You can kind of see where that flank muscle ends. So come down there, and then you'll feel the first rib. I just fold that aside for now, but it kind of gives you a line of where that back strap, loin, short loin, T-bone area is. So I'll score along the ribs. And where we pulled the shoulder off This right here is the muscle we're primarily after right now. It's the loin. So we're going to make sure to stay away from it, but yet close enough that we're not dragging half the rib cage meat with us. The top cut, you will feel the spine with the tip of your knife. And we're going to go down the spine this way. And you're kind of just going to follow each one of those vertebrae down. This is the primary cut, what, you know, the better cut of meat on a deer. So we don't want to screw this one up. Okay, now to remove it, you gotta just get in here and pull it away while trying to keep your knife as flat to the backbone as possible. Lots of arm muscles involved in cutting meat. Seems like you're always pulling, not with your knife hand so much, but with your offhand. Once it gets down to here, it's a lot easier because there's room for you to get your knife in there. Right here, you're kind of catching that rib bone, following it back to the where the rib bone connects to the spine, and then turning to your previous cut. So right here's the tail end of the loin, but I'm going to go ahead and pull the neck meat off with it as well.
How many times have you stabbed yourself?
Once bad enough to go to the hospital, but a lot. Okay, same thing. This gross crap, you don't need that. Fat you don't want to eat. There's a real cool trick. There's a layer of fat and that dried up outside meat. We don't want to eat that. So this is on a beef. This would be chuck. The chuck would go a little bit farther down, and then neck meat. Separate that off. That's our loin. This is everybody's pride and joy right here. Maybe besides the tenderloins, but the tenderloins are going to be the most tender cut of meat, and then the loins. There's an outside flap of tissue connected to the loin. I take it off because there's this thick silver skin in here, and I don't like to chew on that when I eat a steak. I like my steaks to be as tender as possible. So I take that flap off, get the good meat out of it, let the fat and the silver skin go to the trash. When you're removing the silver skin on the loin, a good sharp knife is key. Victorinox by Forstner, that's my choice knife. And then a diamond steel, like 22 degrees. It's where I sharpen my knives. So whole point in us removing this is less chewy stuff on our steaks. We have 2 kids that complain if something's chewy at all. So I kind of visualize this as half and half. I'm going to push this half and I'm going to pull this half. And we try and leave all of the meat on and only get silver skin. I was told back in the day this is what Indians made bowstrings out of off bison. I have no idea if there's relevance to that or not, just something somebody had told me. Makes sense because it's tough. When I first started cutting, the processing facility I worked at, their standard was to do butterfly steaks on the loins, just that way you got a bigger steak. And what a butterfly steak is where you cut one almost all the way through, then you cut another one of the same thickness and open the steak up, and it looks like a butterfly wings. I don't like doing that because I don't like chewing on them. If you are not real consistent in the thicknesses of the steaks you cut, then one side's really rare and one side's overdone. So my kids like theirs more done than I do. So what I like to do, and we use a Traeger for a grill, so a lot of smoke and slow cooking. The loins I like to cut in chunks big enough for the whole family. So I'll cut a 4 or 5 inch chunk that gives enough for the 3 or 4 of us to eat. And I will package it like this, cook it on the grill, then my kids get the 2 steaks on the end because they're more done, and we get the center section because it's less done. And that's a loin. If you guys wanted to steak them, just consistency and the thickness will make it a lot easier in the cooking aspect of it. The more consistent it is, the less you have to worry about, is this one undercooked or is this one overcooked? We prefer our game meat to be medium rare to a little bit on the rare side. It doesn't seem to dry out near as bad that way. Cleaning up all the bloodshot, the drying from aging, the hair that got missed in skinning.
So is it more beneficial to let them hang or cut them up right away?
Goes back to preference. I worked with an old guy that he would let them hang until they got mold on them because that's what his dad did and his dad's dad did, and he swore it made them taste better and more tender. There are studies showing that after 18 days, all of the enzymes that help break down meat to make it more tender have died. So anything after 18 days, all you're doing is losing wet weight of the meat. Depending on conditions, you can lose up to 3.5% per day of weight just from hanging. And that's because bodies are made up of mostly water, moisture. So the southern guys really, really like neck roasts, lots and lots of them. I really, really like 2.5 pounds of hamburger, so I don't roast it. Okay, now we're going to take out the tenderloins, and they are encased in, not encased, I guess, hidden underneath the kidney fat. So going to try and take the kidney fat off as easily and gently without cutting the tenderloin as we can.
So Dakota here built this awesome walk-in cooler in our shop. Just framed in, and then we spray foamed in here and just have a normal air conditioner back there.
With a CoolBot system on it. Thing is well worth the money. They're like $300, but to have a cooler plumbed in, we were looking at like $3,500. So this is definitely the least expensive way to go. It is so nice.
It could be a little extensive in size. I mean, you could cut down the cost if you were going to make a smaller one at home just to fit a couple
Sure,
deer, but we never have just a couple deer.
We have too many friends that like to hunt like we do. So the tenderloin starts just below the pelvic bone. You cut in, you can see the bottom of the pelvic bone there, and then it has a head that comes off this direction, and you just want to be like a surgeon here.
Can't get in there.
So once you have the top loose, same as on the back, on the loin, just cut right down the spine, and then follow these feather bones down. And you're pulling it to you lightly because the tenderloin will tear. Set that guy there.
Earlier this year, I got my buck with my bow, and we didn't notice that the broadhead had broken off inside of it. And
it was lodged like right there.
So
Pretty cool.
sometimes you'll even come across animals that have those left in them that you don't know because they've been shot in the past.
From somebody else's, I've seen that a lot, where the broadhead will then grow scar tissue around it. So when I bring the meat back out of the cooler, I always set the dirty side down over here. That way I can keep his little hair and yuck off of where I'm working. Once again, try and take the fat off without getting too much into the meat. A little bit of bloodshot. And this one, because there is the bloodshot in between the two pieces, I'm going to go ahead and separate that.
Has there ever been any other strange things you've come across while cutting up an animal?
Broken bones that have healed and a long time ago. Elk always seem to have the same torn muscle, and I can show you when we get into the hindquarter. The guys that I used to work with and I came to the consensus after working with beef that it's from jumping fences. Their bodies weren't designed to jump like that. In this day and age with fences everywhere, they have to. Okay. A little bit more right here. And that thing's fit for a Barbie.
How do you prefer to cook the tenderloin?
Really hot and really fast, and almost just sear the outside, and it ends up being extremely rare on the inside.
Any meat wrapped in bacon's better.
Right? Yeah. I think it was on your deer. We wrapped both tenderloins together in bacon and smoked it. It was really good.
What's your new favorite seasoning?
I can't remember the name of it. It's something butter seasoning. Oh, it's to die for.
When you mix butter and bacon together?
Can't go wrong.
We're all about being healthy.
Yeah. Butter, bacon, and potatoes.
Is that about a pound of meat?
A third of a pound, maybe? They're not very big. Okay. Tenderloin's done. Okay, now we're going to get the hindquarters, but to do that, we're going to eliminate the rib section and the spine off. Right in here is the last vertebrae from where it attaches to the spine and the pelvic attach. And bone, 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 soft tissue.
So there's no meat left on the bottom half, pretty much?
Some would argue. Nothing that I feel is worth the time that it takes to get it out. So, cut the feather bone on the back, poke the vertebra, separate the vertebra on both sides, open up the feather bones, grab the neck, and make it go away. I really like the gambrels that have the big hook that wraps around versus the ones that just have the L coming off. Primarily reason I like those is it'll hang on one leg, which allows you to get the hind quarter out and workable. No longer need evidence of sex. So where the two hams connect, you're going to separate the muscles down. The whole time you are putting a fair amount of pressure on the leg that you're pushing down to open it up. You're going to follow the pelvis around. On the back, it has a little bump out that you have to get past. Okay, so the hind leg attaches to the pelvis via ball and socket, right where the head of the tenderloins were. That's the hardest part about getting this hind leg off, is getting this connective tissue between the two cut. Once you get up in there, get that cut, the sirloin is going to go up towards the back. So we want to make sure that as we're cutting up. One deer. Same thing as on the front shoulders. I try and clean it all, rotating it and cleaning it before I pull it off the bone. With no dried up meat, no hair, no fat.
So the slight discoloration in the meat, like right here, that's not anything to be concerned of.
No, it's just where air's gotten into the meat.
Like if it was turning green or something.
Right. This is definitely something anyone can do by themselves. You don't need to be a professional. You don't need to pay somebody. If you're motivated and you have a couple hours time, we've done this on our kitchen counter before we built the shop. Had the deer hanging outside, took our pieces off, went inside where it was clean and we could control the environment, and cut them up on cutting boards in the kitchen.
A pot of hot water is helpful to have because that meat's cold.
It is. This stuff's 32 degrees right now. Hard on the fingers, but I'd much rather have it be cold and hard to work with in that sense than warm and risk losing pieces of meat because it didn't cool properly and then you lose it to spoilage.
So after killing an animal, and you gut it and everything out there, obviously the air temperature outside matters, but what do you got to get the temperature of the animal down to? How quickly?
You have several hours, but you want to start cooling it off as soon as possible. Up here, for us, bow season's the most difficult because it can be 85 degrees outside in bow season, and if you shoot an elk, it is hard to cool that much mass down quickly. That's primarily why I'm such a firm believer in skinning the animals as soon as you can, because you're taking their coat off. That hide's meant to hold their heat in, and it will do that whether they're alive or not. Opening up the animal as much as possible will help as well. Splitting the brisket and splaying the front legs open, splaying the hindquarters open as well, just to try and let as much heat out. On big bulls, when they're rutting, we would even split the neck open down to the spine and try and allow as much air as possible in that way.
It's sad. We've had people that have brought us their animals to process and they just left it in the back of their truck all day, and by the time we get it, it's been spoiled. Or you see guys with their big trophy elks in the back of their truck that want to go show it off all day, and they just ruined all their meat.
Okay, on the hind leg to debone it, I start down by where the foot would attach or the shank would attach. And a lot like the front leg, you're just peeling the muscle away from the bone. And once again, you do not have to separate these two bones, but it allows you to see and be able to work with the pieces of meat a lot easier. So right here, you're just using the tip of your knife. That way you're not dragging your whole knife against the bone. and cutting the connective tissue between the two bones. And if you miss a little bit, well, just take a second and get it.
Is there any significant cuts on this part, or is it all just going to get ground?
Down lower on the leg there is, on the top portion. There's guys that will cut the bone and have bone-in shank or ossobuco, but that really doesn't work with our cooking styles. This piece is still just shank meat. Now we'll remove the top sirloin, which is the football-shaped muscle. So you're going to come in at the top of it by the joint we just removed. Go up a little bit to the bone, and then with the tip of your knife, you're going to find the top of that bone and ride the top of the bone down, and then gently peel it off that bone. Roll it over to the side with the top round, and same thing, you're just peeling it away from the femur. Okay, now you'll lift the top round up, and right now you're not cutting meat, you're cutting connective tissue. Top round, then the eye of round. Once again, only cutting connective tissue. No meat. So this is what I was talking about, where an animal's jumped the fence and tore muscles. That's what it looks like when a muscle heals. You can see the tear went all the way through. And I think it's from jumping fences. Who knows? It could be from different things, but it's the remainder of the shank, the head of the shank. Just goes into grind. There's a gland in this fat portion that you do not want in the meat. I'm gonna get a different knife. So that is a gland. You do not want that in there. Bottom round, same thing, just cutting connective tissue. The top sirloin and bottom sirloin. Top sirloin's great for a roast. Bottom sirloin's good for steaks. Eye of round is good for tenderized steaks. The bottom round is good for tenderized steaks. The top round is good as well. It's going to be more tender. It's one that does not have to be tenderized. Once again, I'm primarily after the best steaks, not just steaks. We use a lot more burger because it's easier to cook with than we do steaks. Therefore, the ones that would need to be tenderized, or that I would tenderize, I don't. I just burger them. trying to limit the amount of fat that goes into the burger.
When you grind it for burger, how much fat do you add?
That's definitely personal preference. On ours, I add about 10 to 12%. Some people like beef fat, some people like pork fat. A lot of that goes to cooking styles. If you're gonna make hamburgers on the barbecue grill, I would recommend beef fat, and I would recommend at least 10%. Otherwise, the meat's not gonna hold together and it's gonna be very crumbly. Pork's different because it has to be cooked a little bit harder, or should be cooked a little bit hotter. You want the internal temperature of pork a fair amount higher than I would prefer to have wild game. So it comes down to personal preference. If you're making stews and chilies and tacos, your meat's gonna get cooked to the point that pork would be okay. But if you're gonna have a rare hamburger, I wouldn't recommend pork. Just a big artery right here. Okay. Square up your steaks. Those pieces are great for stew. 3/4 to 1 inch is typically about what I do. Try and keep them consistent. Try and keep your knife straight as you're cutting. On the bottom round, there's a fair amount of the silver skin. On steaks, it just makes them chewy, so I prefer to remove that. Squared up.
Thanks for watching, guys. Remember to like and subscribe. If you have any questions, comment below. If you have any suggestions, tips, or whatever, let me know. Have a great day. Remember to like and subscribe.